Hey, what's up, guys? We are back. Inswain with Inswain Audio. It has been a minute. It has been more than a minute. It's been a long, long time, but things come up, but it's all good, that's life. We're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about psychological tricks when mixing. So, I got 4 of them for you today, but instead of telling you what they are and then showing you, I'm going to do it backwards. I'm going to show you and then I'm gonna tell you what they are afterwards. So I'm gonna trick you guys. All right, let's jump into it. So I'm gonna play you 2 different clips of the same song. If you're curious, it's my song called "Bussin' Out the Roof," but that's not important. I'm gonna play clip A and clip B of both of these, and you guys tell me which one you think sounds better. All right, here's the first one. And here's the second one. Which one of those 2 did you think sounded better? I bet you're thinking the second one, and I am too. Well, the first trick is just that. They're actually the exact same audio, same mix, just the second one is louder. So, that's our first psychological trick when mixing is our ears perceive louder as better, even though it may be the exact same. So don't fall for this trick when you're mixing. That's why we have auto gain functions or an output gain or things like this on plugins so that we can level match or gain match our before and after when processing with a plugin. And the reason that this is so important is so that we hear the changes that the plugin is providing, not that and the volume. We want to eliminate volume as a variable when judging the before and after. For example, if we're EQing and we do a bunch of boosts and cuts, whatever they may be, the signal might be getting louder or quieter after that processing. So that's why we have an output gain where we can adjust that so that it's, as close as we can get to the afterwards, the gain being the same as the gain was before. So when we bypass our plugins, on and off, before and after, we're not hearing a volume difference and an EQ difference. We're only hearing an EQ difference. So then we can actually hear what we are adjusting and changing and then decide if it was right or if it was wrong, if we need to adjust further, back off on some things. Basically, we can make a clear, conscious assessment without volume interfering with our perception of the signal. The next psychological trick, I can't really show you. I don't have a way to simulate this, but what it is ear fatigue. What ear fatigue is I'm sure we've all experienced this as we're working on music, sometimes for hours on end. We start to hear things differently or not hear things that we normally would, right? How many times has this happened? You're working on a mix all night. You think you dialed it in. It sounds great. And then you listen to it the next day and you're like, whose song is this? I don't even recognize this, right? It's happened to all of us. And what's happening is ear fatigue. Now, ear fatigue comes in 2 parts, right? There's the psychological aspect where we just start to miss things, right? It's happening internally, sort of with our brains, but it also physically can happen too. And what I mean by this is that there's actual physical changes to our ears and the inner workings of our ears. I'm not going to get too into detail of that. It's not important, but they start to get worn out and they hear things differently, particularly in the high end. So not only are we psychologically tricked into hearing things differently or not as good or not at all, we're also physically, our hearing is altering throughout the course of a mixing session. So how do we combat this? Take breaks, spread your session across multiple days. All right, psychological trick number 3 in mixing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play some audio and I'm going to use an EQ to make some adjustments. And let's see if you can notice a difference or what's happening here. See if you can pick up on it. So what just happened there? Literally nothing. I was actually using the bypass enabled on the plugin while mixing. What I mean is the plugin was turned off. It was bypassed. So nothing was happening. All of the changes that looked like they were occurring weren't. And this actually happens to the best of us. Even mix engineers at the top level still admit that they'll spend 10, 15, however many minutes dialing in an EQ or a compressor just to find out that it was bypassed the entire time. So the psychological trick here is that we trick ourselves into hearing changes that aren't actually happening when a plugin is bypassed, right? So make sure that your plugins are not bypassed when you don't want them to be, and make sure that they're enabled when you think they are, and when you're dialing things in. And if it happens from time to time, it's okay. Don't feel discouraged when you spend 10 minutes dialing in the perfect compressor settings just to find out that it was bypassed the whole time. Even knowing this information isn't enough to trump what's going to happen in your brains. When you see the moves, you think they're happening. So that's psychological trick number 3. All right, and for the fourth and final psychological trick in mixing, I don't really know a good way to show you this or to simulate it, so I'm just going to talk about it. I also am not aware of any, scientific research that backs this up. I'm sure it exists. I really firmly believe that this is a phenomenon that happens. Even if there isn't research, I really do believe this is a thing. So just trust me on this. You might have actually seen it occur yourself. And this is that visuals alter our hearing, kind of like in the last one where the EQ was off and we saw the visual movement and it changed our perception to hearing it. But this one takes it a little further, and I think different visual cues can change the way that we hear what's actually happening. What I mean by this is when we're EQing, right? Sometimes we have to make a big sweeping EQ move, and because it looks so big and massive, we might be like, ooh, that's too much, right? We're either boosting or cutting too much, and our ears are going to perceive that as an extreme boost or cut, whatever it is that we're doing, because our eyes see that it's big. But that might not be the case. It might actually need that much processing. And if your ears were not being deceived, then you might be able to understand that. Another example is when you bypass a plugin, sometimes the colors desaturate, right? Like it turns gray, or, it kind of blacks out and it's not as colorful as when it's on. Just by seeing it get dimmer and duller in color, we perceive that, I believe, as not as good sounding, right? So take, for example, a plugin that's doing no processing, right? It's everything's set to 0. It's not adding any harmonics, nothing. It's doing nothing. When we bypass it and it turns dim and gray and dulled out, we may perceive that as sounding worse than when we re-enable it and it's all colorful and bright. And now we think, ooh, it sounds better and fuller, or whatever word you want to use. But actually, there's no processing happening. It's just our eyes being tricked. And this is an interesting phenomenon that I've never heard anyone talk about. I've watched plenty of YouTube tutorials and stuff like that, and I've never heard anyone mention this, but I really feel it happened to me a lot. But what do we do about this? How do we combat it? One thing that I found is to close my eyes periodically. So what I'll be doing when I'm mixing is I'll close my eyes and I'll start making that EQ move. I'll find the frequency area that I want and say I want to boost at 2K, for example. I'll set a point at 2K, and when I get my mouse where the gain knob is and I'm starting to boost there, I'll start doing it, but I'll close my eyes and keep boosting until it sounds appropriate. And then I'll open my eyes and see how much gain I added. Sometimes it's half a decibel, sometimes it's 4, right? So sometimes it's less than I would have imagined, sometimes it's more, but that's not really important. The important thing is that it sounds good, right? Because we're not making visual art, we're making music here. So if it sounds good, then it is good. So that's one way that we can kind of combat this, is by closing our eyes periodically. And another little bonus tip here that I do quite often, when I'm mixing, I use the bypass function a lot. I'll bypass and then re-engage plugins to hear the difference, to make sure that I'm making the correct decision. And when I'm deciding if the bypass is better or the enabled is better, what I'll do is I'll close my eyes and put my mouse over the bypass button, and I'll click it a bunch of times, and where I'm not counting and tracking. And then what I'll do is I'll listen, and then I'll click it again and listen, right? So I'm bypassing and re-enabling the plugin back and forth, but I don't know which one in my mind is the bypass or the enable, and I'll listen and tell myself and decide which one I think sounds better, and then I'll open my eyes and see, was it enabled when I thought it was better, or was it bypassed when I thought it was better? And just, that's a way to be honest with yourself and to not, be biased by looking, or even to trick yourself by looking. Most of the time, I've gotten to the point where most of the time I can tell which is enabled and which isn't with my eyes closed. But sometimes I'm doing very subtle moves where I can't tell. And when I close my eyes, I'm like, I kind of like this one a little bit more. And then I'll open my eyes. Most of the time, I like the processing that I do. But still, at this point, there's times where I'm like, it sounded better before. I didn't need that. So I'll just take the plugin off or make further adjustments or use something else, right? It's just a way to be honest with yourself and not be biased. So yeah, there we have it. There's 4 psychological tricks that occur when mixing and some tips to combat them. But remember, happens to the best of us. Have fun mixing out there. I'll see you guys soon in the next tutorial. I got plenty of tutorials coming soon, tons lined up. I'm filming a bunch right now, so stay tuned for that. Maybe like and subscribe. I'm a real YouTuber now. I said like and subscribe. I didn't think I would ever come to this, but not for real. It really helps. We're gonna start growing the community, giving back, offering some stuff. So yeah, stay tuned. I'll see you soon. Peace.